Hello, students. It's Miss Arneson, and this morning I'm going to walk you through some vocabulary for genetic probability and heredity probability. Remember, probability is like the percent likelihood of something happening. So we're going to look at the percent likelihood of passing down certain traits. We need the vocabulary so that we can look at that. That's one of the specific standards that we have for this term. So the first word is a review vocabulary word, but you could write it down again. The genotype is the genes an individual has. So in this example, the genotypes are being shown at the top. So here's a represented chromosome, right? This is a model. And they have the W, and this one has a big W and a big W. This one has a big one and a little one. This one has a little one and a big one. And then this one is little. Those are all examples of genotypes. It's the gene you got from your mom and the gene you got from your dad. Phenotypes, we did mention earlier, they're the expressed physical trait. So genotypes are the genes you have, and then phenotypes are what you're actually going to look like. And remember, some of the things that are going to be phenotypes are not going to actually show up as looking a certain way. So there's one I'm thinking of, there's a gene that you can get that makes you stinkier, and I have that gene for sure. My mom does not. She actually can go like days without a shower and not smell bad. But if I go one day without a shower, I am stinky. So I have to take a shower every day. I cannot forget deodorant. And so I have the stinky gene. And that's a phenotype. Even though you can't see it, you can smell it. There's a phenotype that has to do with being able to digest milk. And if you have this certain protein in your digestive system called lactase, then you can digest milk. If you don't have it, then you can't digest the sugar in milk. So you become lactose intolerant because you don't have lactase, that protein that digests that sugar. That's also a phenotype. So saying phenotype is the genes that we, or the traits that we can see, I mean, what we really mean is not what we can see, it's what is actually happening in physical reality. Remember, these are just the directions for building the proteins. The phenotypes would be the proteins themselves. So in this fly example, these flies can have wrinkled wings or they can have normal wings. It just depends on what genes they got from their parents. And I hope you guys are writing some of these things down. Like when I'm talking about what a phenotype is, you probably should write down that it's the physical trait, it's the protein, the genotypes are the directions for building the protein, the DNA, the phenotypes would be the proteins themselves. Okay, so when we're talking about genotype options, there's going to be a lot of them, but you can basically put them in three categories in high school science. So if you move on and you're studying genetics in college, then you're going to have a lot more options than this. But these are the basic ones that we use because they're logical for high school. Hetero is a prefix that means different. And the easiest way to remember this is if you're heterosexual, you like people who are a different sex than you. And this is a genotype option. I've circled all of the possible genotypes over here that are considered heterozygous. So this is, of course, pea plants, and it's talking about the flower. So the big B and the little b, those are different because one of them is capitalized and one of them is lowercase. You can see that both of the parents, so this would be the male parent and the female parent, both of them are heterozygous. They have a capital letter and a lowercase letter. That's different. So if these two flowers were going to produce seeds, 3 of the seeds would be purple flowers, or when those plants grow up, they would have purple flowers, and only one of them would have white flowers. We're going to get to talking about why only one would have white later. But for now, look at the fact that 2 of the offspring boxes here, because that's what's in the middle of a Punnett square, the offspring boxes, these are big B, little b. So half of their offspring would also be heterozygous if both of the parents are heterozygous. So this heterozygous, what I would write down for it is hetero means different, and I would write 2 different alleles, a capital and a lowercase allele. And we just write these as capital and lowercase, but I'm sure you can tell by looking at the picture, the capital letter represents purple flowers and the lowercase one represents white flowers. Oh dang, I didn't put a homozygous one. Did I? Did I put it in the wrong spot? Ooh, okay. No, I didn't. I didn't put it in order that way. Okay, so dominant. So we're going to talk about dominant alleles. An allele, and this is a good word to write down, A-L-L-E-L-E. It's such a weird word to say. It looks like allele, but you say allele. These are the versions of the gene. So when we're talking about pea plants, there's two versions. There's purple or white. The dominant one is going to be the one that is stronger, the one that takes over. It will mask the recessive phenotype. So a dominant genotype, we're going to represent with big letters, capital letters. So you would write that down for sure. So we're going to represent dominant alleles, dominant genes with capital letters. And in this particular case, there's a bunch of ways to tell that purple is the dominant one. You can tell because big B is purple, so that would be dominant. And you can also just count the number of flowers. There's 5 purple flowers in this story and only 1 white one. So the purple is the dominant color or the stronger color in pea plants. I would love to be a pea plant because I love purple. Purple is my favorite color. Okay, now let's get to the other type of allele, the recessive one. So recessive alleles are going to be the weaker one. They're not going to show up if there's any dominant part of the genotype. So here in this case, the allele that's recessive is going to be the lowercase letter. So we always represent the lowercase letters are going to be recessive genes. And in this case, the only flower that is recessive in both of its genes is the little b one down here, and it's white. And so that's the flower color in this case that is representative of the recessive phenotype. So the recessive genes, in order to get a recessive trait, you have to have little b, little b. And I know right now a lot of you guys are probably just writing down these vocabulary words, but they'll make more sense when we start using them. So for now, you're basically building yourself a dictionary of these words. Later, when we start putting them into practice, they'll start making more sense. So I know some of you are probably still like, what's going on? Okay, let's move to the other combination of genes that you can have. So this is a genotype option called homozygous. And remember how heterozygous, hetero means different, just like heterosexual, different sex than you is who you prefer. Here in homozygous, homo means the same. If you're homosexual, you like people who are the same sex as you. So in this case, we're going to have 2 letters that are the same. But you can have 2 capitals or 2 lower cases. And so we have to distinguish between those two by saying homozygous dominant, because those are going to be big B, or homozygous recessive, which would be little b, little b. One thing I want you to note is that you can use any letter when you're doing this. So if we wanted to, we could use capital P and lowercase p because the color is purple. But the reason we use B's and R's and T's, those are letters that are common, is because the capital one and the lowercase one look the same, or look different. Like if you think of a capital S and a lowercase s, the only difference is size. And unless you're typing, it's really hard to tell the difference between those. So we usually use letters that the capital and the lowercase symbols are different, not just a larger and a smaller size. So homo means the same, and so in this case, we're going to have 2 of the same alleles. Now remember, every one of these pea plants has to have 2 genes. You have to have one from your mom and one from your dad. So this is representing the 2 genes that mom has, and this is representing the 2 genes that dad has. And based on that, we would fill in the Punnett square with the possible options for the kids. So a Punnett square is a tool for determining the likelihood of genotypes and phenotypes. I hope you wrote that down. So it's just a tool that we use. And Punnett squares can get pretty complicated. This one just has one trait, but you could also do, because pea plants, they not only have the color of flower, but they also have like the shape of the pea, the color of the pea. Some peas are yellow, some peas are green. So you could also put multiple traits on there. So you could say maybe the dad has purple flowers and wrinkly seeds, and the mom has purple flowers, but she has smooth seeds, and then you would have actually 16 boxes inside of your Punnett square instead of just 4. So these are tools to help us determine the likelihood of the offspring genotypes and phenotypes. But I want to note that Punnett squares don't work for every trait. Punnett squares are only going to work for what are called Mendelian traits. Mendelian traits just have one gene that determines the trait. Most of the things in the human body have more than that, but we're going to write that word down later. Okay, where do the male and females go, and what are the symbols for them? So sometimes it'll tell you in a word problem that there's a male flower or a male mouse that has these genes and a female mouse that has these genes. The proper way to do it is to put the dad on top and the mom on the bottom. So this is the dad symbol and this is the mom symbol, or this is the female symbol and the male symbol. And so I just want you to know what those look like in case a problem that you get someday has these symbols. If you put dad on the bottom and mom on the top, it'll still work. So don't worry about it. There's one other thing that's proper to do, and I just want to tell you this, but it'll still work even if you don't do it. You're supposed to put the capital letters first and the lowercase letters second. So make sure that when you're ordering these, that you write down the capital one first and the lowercase one second. It still won't change your results, but it's just the proper way to do it. It's like I could still read the word if you don't capitalize it and it's a proper noun, but the correct way to do it is to capitalize proper nouns. Okay, so let's talk about inheritance patterns. Inheritance patterns talk about, well, how likely is it going to be for these different genes to be passed on and these different traits to be passed on? This is a word you need to write down, Mendelian. So one of the scientists who's really important for helping us figure out genetics, his name was Gregor Mendel. He was a monk and he studied pea plants. So that's why we've got a lot of peas on here, these pea flowers. Gregor Mendel, he did all of this research and basically figured out what happens if there's only 2 versions of a gene. So in this case, in pea plants, there's 2 versions of the gene. There's the capitalized one, which is the dominant, and that's for purple flowers, and the lowercase one, that's for recessive, that has the white flowers. Unfortunately, there's almost no traits in humans, there's only a few, which I'll tell you about later, that are Mendelian. So when we draw this for eye color, because we're going to simplify it and make eye color into capital and lowercase, we're going to just pretend like humans have 2 eye options, brown and blue. It's way more complicated than that, as you know, but we're going to pretend so that we can make some models. Okay, so here's another kind of inheritance pattern that's called autosomal. And autosomal genes are going to be ones that are either in every generation or if they skip a generation. So these are going to be, usually we care about autosomes when we're talking about diseases. So here they're using affected father. That means he's affected by a disease. And then sometimes they'll use the word carrier for the child. So this child is going to have the genetic disease, and so does this one. And so what happens is that the dad has a gene that gives him some disease. And so in half of his offspring, if he has 4 offspring, half of them will have the disease. Half of them will have it. That's called autosomal dominant. If it was autosomal recessive, it would mean that either none of his kids have it or only one of them. And we care about this when we're talking about genetic diseases. So that's why I bring it up. So autosomal has to do with the parents passing on genes that carry diseases to their children. Okay, so here's another 2 type of inheritance pattern. So there's something called codominance and I want you to write that down. Codominant genes are going to be ones where the red and the white are both dominant. And so what happens is that part of the flower would be red and part of it would be white. So in this case, red petunias are more dominant than white petunias, but sometimes you can have codominant flowers. And this is why we have so many different types of flowers, which is really great. I'm glad that this happens in nature. So here we have different parts of the flower. Sometimes the codominants will be like these stripes of red within the white, which is really cool. Incomplete dominance means that both of them are equal in their dominance. And so instead of having part of it be red and part of it be white, or be red or white, those mix together and we get pink flowers. So you want to write that incomplete dominance is a mixing of the two alleles. Codominance means that part of it's going to be one color and part of it is going to be another color. Okay, so this is my favorite type of inheritance because it has to do not with sex. I mean, that's not why it's my favorite, but it's because it's the most interesting to me. So you know how if you know people who are colorblind, they're almost always guys. Well, this is why that happens. So remember that the Y chromosome is smaller than the X chromosome, so it doesn't have as many genes. So this is why most of the people who are colorblind are going to be men. If you have one parent, so here both of these parents would not be colorblind, but they could have a kid who is. The reason for that is because the mom carries the colorblind gene. And so when she passes that on to her kid, the Y chromosome doesn't have a gene for color blindness. And so there's no dominant gene on this other chromosome to like cancel this one out. So see, on this daughter, she's a carrier. She has the colorblind gene, but because she has another X chromosome, she has this dominant one that basically cancels this one out and doesn't make it into the phenotype. So that's why males are more often colorblind than females. It's because there's less genes on the Y chromosome than the X one. Okay, and then sometimes the inheritance patterns, and you don't have to write this down, I'm just telling you, are really complicated. So in blood type, for example, you can have like all these different options. So I won't be asking you any questions about blood type because it's really complicated, but I just want you to know that there are genes out there that are really complicated in figuring out the frequency of those genes in the offspring. So we won't be doing those in a regular high school science class. If this was AP biology, then we would have to. Okay, so let's just compare really quick Mendelian and polygenic traits. Mendelian, there are only two possible alleles. There's only one gene that controls for that trait. In human beings, there are not very many of those traits, but I'll tell you what some of them are. So your earwax. Your earwax can be wet or dry. I know this is a gross picture, but this was actually the least gross Q-tip picture I could find. If you Google earwax, you are going to see some nasty Halloween stuff. So you might want to do that since this week is Halloween. But Q-tips can give you evidence. You're not supposed to put Q-tips actually in your ear canal. You're supposed to clean the outside of your ear with Q-tips. But I know everyone does, and I do. But I'm just telling you, you shouldn't because it's a safety thing. You can have wet earwax, and if you have wet earwax, it's going to be like kind of smooth looking, and if you have dry earwax, it's going to look like kind of chunky. So my little brother Jonathan, I thought there was only wet earwax for my whole life because I have wet earwax, but I looked at my brother Jonathan's ear one day. I mean, you know, sitting next to him, and he has like chunkier. It's kind of like it's a lighter color than mine because it's chunkier. Mine's like really bright yellow, and his is chunkier and a lighter yellow. Mine's really smooth looking. So I have wet earwax and he has dry earwax. And in humans, that's a Mendelian trait. It's only controlled for by one gene in the body. There's a couple of other ones. There's the widow's peak, hitchhiker's thumb. You can Google these if you want. There's also if your earlobe is attached or not attached. But for most of the human traits, for almost all human phenotypes, there's multiple genes that are at play. So in human eye color, there's a lot of different genes working. At least 16 genes determine your eye color. I don't know if these probability like are correct. I just found this picture on the internet and I know that it's at least partially correct, but I don't know if the numbers are exactly right. So please don't quote this when you're trying to figure out what eye color your cousin's baby might have. So sometimes, remember in the introduction of this lesson, we talked about how you could have a blue-eyed kid even if both parents have a different color of eye. And so my parents, this is my parents' case. So there was only a 12% chance that I was going to have blue eyes, but I do. None of my brothers have, well, actually one of my brothers does, but he has a different dad than I do, so it doesn't even matter because we all have different parents. So in this case, I know for sure basically that if Mr. Arneson and I were going to have a genetic kid, they would have blue eyes because Mr. Arneson and I both have blue eyes. If we had a brown-eyed kid, then it would mean that I cheated on Mr. Arneson or went to a sperm bank or something and it wasn't actually his kid. But if you have any other combination of eye color, besides green and blue or green and green, so if you have one person with brown eyes, then you can always have brown-eyed kids. And you're more likely to have brown-eyed kids if you have brown eyes because brown eyes are dominant. So these are polygenic developed traits. That means many genes control them. Poly is a prefix that means many, and then genes is right here. So many genes. Okay, I just want to give you one more thing that you need to know about vocabulary wise, and it's a pedigree chart. Pedigree charts show generations of families. I can remember this because like you have to get your pedigree for your dog. Like if you buy a dog that's a full bred, then you have to know that its parents and its grandparents were also completely they were also pugs. In order to have a full bred dog that is a pug, you have to have parents that are all pugs. So this is showing us the dominant trait is going to be the white one. The recessive one is going to be the black one. And the way you can tell is that you can just count there's way fewer black ones. Now, I know right off the bat that this is a sex-linked trait that they're mapping here because there's only males that have the recessive phenotype. Then if it's showing you half like this, it means that this person is a carrier. So pedigree charts just show how genes, how traits go through a family. That's all. Here, this means the generation. So like generation 1 would be like your great-great-great-grandparents. Generation 2, your great-grandparents. Generation 3, your grandparents. And then generation 4 would be your parents. Or if you were one of these ones, then it would be like your it just depends. Like if this was you, then these would be your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. If you're not on the chart and this is showing your parents, then this would be your parents, grandparents, great, and then great-great-grandparents. So you can make one of these actually for your own family if you have enough information. But that's all I've got for you guys this morning. Sorry, this is kind of a long video, but there were a lot of words to go over.